You won't believe what went down in this quiet suburban neighborhood when a full-blown emergency turned into a showdown with the local HOA president, aka the ultimate Karen. It all started when a neighbor's health took a sudden turn, and an ambulance rushed in, sirens blaring, lights flashing, every second counting. But instead of helping or moving out of the way, this entitled HOA Karen decided her asterisk rules mattered more than someone's life. Yep, she parked her car smack in the middle of the shared driveway and flat out refused to move. The EMTs begged her, neighbors pleaded, but she stood her ground like she was guarding a royal palace. You could literally hear the panic in everyone's voice. But Karen just kept ranting about violating HOA regulations and unauthorized vehicles. This wasn't just a bad attitude, it turned dangerous. People watched in disbelief as precious minutes ticked by, and the blocked ambulance sat there helpless. But what happened next? Oh, it was something no one saw coming. Let's just say karma didn't take long to show up, and it came in the form of flashing red and blue lights. If you think HOA drama is just about lawn heights and paint colors, think again. Because this story, it escalates fast. Stick around to see how a power trip turned into handcuffs and justice in the driveway. So here's the deal, this wasn't just any neighborhood. This place had a long history of HOA drama, with rules for everything from mailbox height to the color of your flower pots. And at the center of it all, the self-appointed queen of the block, let's just call her Karen. She didn't just enforce the rules, she lived for them. Always lurking, always watching, and always ready to scold someone for leaving their trash bins out too long or parking an inch over the line. Now imagine this same person standing in front of an emergency vehicle, arms crossed, shouting about how the ambulance was not authorized to enter without HOA notice. No joke, she actually said that. Meanwhile, the person inside the house was still waiting for help. Neighbors started coming out, trying to reason with her, but Karen wasn't having it. She claimed the driver was being aggressive, even though all he did was ask her to move her car. One of the neighbors even mentioned they'd had issues with her before, like the time she called the cops on a kid's birthday party for being too loud. So yeah, people already knew she was a handful, but this was on a whole other level, and just when it felt like things couldn't get worse, they did. As the minutes dragged on, the situation started spiraling. The paramedics were doing their best to stay calm, but you could see the frustration building. One of them tried explaining, again, that they were responding to a real medical emergency just a few houses down, but Karen wouldn't budge. She kept repeating, "This is private property. You can't just barge in here without HOA clearance." It was almost like she cared more about paperwork than a human life. You could feel the anger rising from the neighbors, watching it all unfold. Phones came out, people were recording, calling 911 again, hoping someone, anyone would step in. Meanwhile, the person inside the house, an elderly man, was still waiting. His daughter, who lived with him, was on the porch in tears, trying to get through to Karen. But it was like talking to a brick wall. Karen was too focused on control. One neighbor mentioned it wasn't the first time Karen had pulled something like this. Apparently, she once tried to tow a delivery van because it parked too close to the curb. The tension on that street was electric. You had neighbors arguing, EMTs pacing, and a woman crying while her dad struggled to breathe inside. And Karen? She just stood there, blocking the way, holding up an entire emergency, like it was some sort of HOA power play. At this point, the whole neighborhood felt like it was holding its breath. The flashing ambulance lights lit up the street, bouncing off windows and casting long shadows. More neighbors started gathering, some in pajamas, others barefoot, all shaken by what was unfolding. Everyone could hear the wheezing from the porch where the daughter was pleading with dispatch, her voice cracking, begging for backup. The paramedics had their gear ready, but their hands were tied, literally stuck just yards away from where they needed to be. all because of one entitled person and her obsession with HOA rules. Karen, arms crossed and jaw tight, stood in front of her car like it was some kind of last stand. She kept pointing out that no emergency vehicles were cleared to enter without permission, like she was quoting from some invisible HOA lawbook. One of the EMTs stepped forward again, trying to reason with her one last time, telling her this delay could be life-threatening. Her response? "That's not my problem. You should have followed the proper process." By now, the crowd was no longer quiet. You could hear murmurs turning into shouts. A few neighbors had even moved to stand between Karen and the ambulance, trying to push past the madness. The atmosphere was thick with tension, rage, fear, helplessness, and just when it felt like the pressure couldn't get any higher, sirens echoed again. But this time, they weren't from the ambulance. The new sirens grew louder by the second, and every head on the street turned. 2 police cruisers rolled up fast, lights flashing, cutting through the chaos. The tension shifted immediately. You could feel it in the air. Karen, who had been so confident and smug just moments before, suddenly looked a little less sure of herself. She took a small step back, clutching her phone like it was a shield. But even then, she started yelling before the officers fully stepped out, claiming she was the one being harassed. She pointed fingers at neighbors, at the EMTs, and even accused the ambulance driver of intimidation. But then came the twist. One of the officers recognized a family. Turns out, this wasn't just a random emergency. The elderly man inside had a serious heart condition, and this wasn't his first medical scare. The officers had responded to that house before. They didn't hesitate. They rushed to the paramedics, then to the daughter, who was nearly in shock from the emotional toll of the night. And that's when the story really took a turn. As officers tried to get Karen to move her car, she doubled down again. She demanded a supervisor, said she knew her rights, and that the HOA backed her. But when the officers asked for her ID, things escalated fast. Her voice got louder. The crowd got quieter. And in the middle of it all, the ambulance was still waiting, blocked. The shouting hit a peak as Karen refused to hand over her ID, waving her phone around and demanding the police deal with the real problem, which, in her mind, was somehow still the ambulance. One officer tried calmly explaining that obstructing emergency services was a serious offense, but she wasn't listening. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The officer gave one last warning, and when she still refused, they stepped in. Gasps echoed through the crowd as Karen was gently, but firmly, placed in handcuffs. She kept ranting about unlawful detainment and calling her lawyer, but by then, no one was really paying attention. The paramedics finally got the green light and rushed down the driveway, equipment in hand. It had been nearly 15 minutes since they'd first arrived, and every second had felt like an hour. The daughter sobbed as the EMTs got to work on her dad. He was barely conscious, but still breathing. Neighbors watched in stunned silence as Karen was walked to the police car, still protesting. But then, just when things seemed to settle, the final twist hit. One of the neighbors stepped forward with something in their hand, a printout. Turns out, Karen had been removed from the HOA board months ago after a vote. She wasn't even authorized to act on its behalf anymore. Her power trip, all based on nothing. Neighbors watched in stunned silence as Karen was walked to the police car, still protesting. But then, just when things seemed to settle, the final twist hit. One of the neighbors stepped forward with something in their hand, a printout. Turns out, Karen had been removed from the HOA board months ago after a vote. She wasn't even authorized to act on its behalf anymore. Her power trip, all based on nothing. As Karen was loaded into the police car, her protests faded, replaced by the sound of neighbors finally breathing a sigh of relief. The ambulance, after what felt like an eternity, was finally able to drive up to the house. The EMTs worked quickly, and within moments, the elderly man was in the back of the ambulance, on his way to the hospital. His daughter, though still shaken, thanked the neighbors who had supported her, grateful that help had arrived just in time. The revelation about Karen's expired HOA authority left everyone speechless. It turned out she'd been using her title and the HOA's name to control people for months, bullying neighbors into compliance with her twisted sense of power. But in the end, it was clear. Her grip was slipping. The neighborhood felt like it had just escaped a storm, and for the first time in a long time, people started talking about change, about reclaiming their community from Karen's control. By the time the police left, Karen's rule had been shattered, and the neighborhood, it was quieter, calmer, and stronger. People had seen the power of standing up for what's right, and even though the drama had shaken them, they knew one thing for sure: nobody was going to let an HOA Karen block their lives ever again.